Good evening. We're delighted to have you with us here tonight for one of our Enrichment Series favorite events, where some of our Wellington folks are going to speak to you about some of the directions that we are taking here at the school. Welcome to the Wellington Enrichment Series. You have some beautiful gifts for you on the chair. Those are yours to keep. We do have a card that we ask you to fill out before you leave tonight, telling us what you thought of the program. So don't fill that out yet. I think it's premature. We also have on the chair a fantastic, yes, thank you, Judy Chester, flashlight. Now, you have to take the thingy off of the thing and then undo the thing so that it will then work. So please work on that, but please don't show your excitement about the program by shining the flashlights into the eyes of our speakers, because in some cultures that's not deemed to be polite. If you would fill out your card before you leave, we would very much appreciate that. We're proud of the series that we put together. We think that it highlights some of the important thinking that we do that helps to make our school and our students so successful, and we're glad that you're here. All of these events are open to the public, and they are free of charge, so bring friends. We love to include the community in the conversation. So now we're going to get started. When we started the Enrichment Series, we had a dream. We wanted to bring voices, experts like Sir Ken Robinson, Dr. Young Zhao, and David Schenk. That was a stroll down memory lane. How many of you were here for all three of those folks? All right, way to go. We were looking for people who could help us change the conversation about education from the trivial to that which is essential, and especially to focus on the things, the opportunities at Wellington that differentiate us from other public, private, and parochial schools. Then once a year at All Things Wellington, which, if you consult the convenient pamphlet on your chair, we've become the Wellington School. Thank you. It is so helpful. At All Things Wellington, we have talked about the practices that have been inspired from the work of these thinkers, which is a very exciting thing for us to do. But tonight, we've decided, as we did last year, that we're not just going to bring in speakers from Oregon, New York, and other places. We have speakers who are local. We have our own folks who are working on incredibly important work, and we're going to call them to the lectern shortly to talk with you about their work. Last year, Dr. Jeff Turwin, Learning Dean Rachel Altoff, and Head of School Rob Brisk, I talk about myself in the third person every chance I get, presented important work that was our focus on an evening so memorable that the three of us still remember it. Many parents told us that they wanted more, that they wanted more Wellington people sharing their thinking, and we listened, and tonight's provocative program comes out of that. So Erin Noviski will share with you her focus on positive education, work studied in depth by Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania and best practiced at the Geelong School in Melbourne, Australia. Fourth grade teacher Erica Foster will then discuss the important work she is doing around Carol Dweck's groundbreaking work on mindsets. And finally, Dr. Brandon Sullivan, new to Wellington this year, will present information about our science research program and the importance of student autonomy in studies. We hope to save sufficient time for robust conversation after the presentations, and we have fancy stools for you three to sit on. So we thank you for being here. We're really excited to be sharing what we believe is work that's important to your children, to Wellington, and to the world of education. So to start us off, I'm delighted to introduce Erin Noviski. Erin has worked at Wellington for the past 20 years, starting her third decade at the Wellington School, the last 6 years as middle school head, and Erin pairs an enduring care and love of adolescence with a striving for creating the right conditions for student success. Tonight, Erin will be discussing positive education. It is my pleasure to turn this over to Erin Noviski.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? It is really, I'm just thrilled to be here tonight to talk to you about positive education. Before we start, I do have to share just a little story from today. I asked my 6th grade Power of Your Brain class, I said, would you guys mind listening to my presentation and giving me some feedback? And they said, no, of course not. And so they all took out a piece of paper and their pencils, and I went through the presentation. And they had really valuable advice, ranging from don't say so much, slow down, if you lose focus, wiggle your big toe. So I'll be thinking about that. And they also said, don't look at your notes so much. I'm going to ask for your understanding, as I may have to look at my notes since we arrived Sunday night late, and I'm a little foggy, and I want to make sure that I don't forget anything. So thank you for understanding that. How many of you here know a little bit about positive psychology and/or positive education? Okay, great. Last February, I didn't really know much either, and that was when the administrative team decided to read Flourish. And it is a book about well-being written by Brandon Sullivan, as Rob mentioned, and he is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. We read it and it kind of knocked our socks off. It really resonated with us, and as we investigated and read further into the topic, we thought it fit with us, and we were kind of excited to think about the possibilities that this approach could offer us in terms of further fortifying our children. Does anyone know where I've been for the last 10 days? Mr. Brisk.
Have you been in Australia?
I have been in Australia, and I think that you said I was where?
Geelong.
Yes, in what city?
Primary school in Melbourne.
Melbourne? Laura, how do you pronounce Melbourne? Melbourne, yes. We were, it was actually a little bit outside of Melbourne, and the Geelong Grammar School is the leading school of Pos Ed. They've been doing it for almost 10 years now. Martin Seligman actually trained the folks there, and they do trainings now, and they have really embedded positive psychology throughout their curriculum. We looked for schools around the US that we could visit to maybe learn and not have to travel so far. Unfortunately, or fortunately for me and Laura, we had to go to Geelong to get this training. And it really was terrific, and we learned a lot. My first goal tonight is to leave you with a thorough understanding of positive psychology and positive education. My second objective is to get you and to get all of us thinking about how we might further implement this at Wellington in order to increase our children's sense of well-being and to make them better prepared for college and for their adult lives. So, before we dive into theory and practice, I'm wondering if you might share with me what you want for your children. Happy life, okay? Productive, okay. I'm kind of a fast writer. You can shout them out. Resiliency? Go ahead. What? Oh, okay.
Love of learning. Perfect.
Learn how to get what you want.
Awareness of yourself and others. Good health.
Okay, hold on. I'm not that fast. Wholeness, and then wait, I missed 2. Health. I feel like I missed another one. Self-awareness, yes, thank you. Mindfulness, and I didn't hear the second one? Kindness. Altruism, does that work or not? Is that too? selfless, altruistic, service, courage. Compassion. We're slowing down here. I mean, not that that's a tall order or anything, but anything we're forgetting? Respectful.
How about independent?
Yes. I think all my middle school parents would love to see that happen sooner than later, perhaps.
Also, challenge people.
Curious.
Problem solver. Willingness to fight for anything.
I'm shortening that one. Okay, that's a pretty good list, yes. Okay, we'll come back to this in a little bit. Okay. So many gadgets up here. So I talked a little bit about Martin Seligman already. He kind of transformed the whole landscape of American psychology when he took over the American Psychological Association. Psychologists were focusing more on the negative and the illnesses and how to cure those. He flipped the focus to try to encourage people, all people, not just the mentally ill one, but all people to lead flourishing lives. In addition, he wanted to increase their well-being and a sense of purpose and meaning. He's the founder of positive psychology, and he currently leads the world-renowned Center of Positive Psychology at UPenn. You can see the definition here and its goal of helping people flourish and to lead flourishing lives. Well, what would a flourisher possess? All of these things. Do you see some connections here? Yes, I think at least we've got, this is a smaller list, we've got a bigger list, but that's okay. How do we get there? How do we get our students, our children, to be flourishing? Well, he has a model that he refers to as PERMA, and it stands for the following. Have you guys seen this? No? Okay, great. I'm going to walk through it, and then we're going to make sure that we understand it, and then we'll talk about what implications those have for us. So P is for positive emotion. How do our emotions influence us? They affect us in all of these ways. They form who we are, essentially. Social scientists posit that we as humans tend to have a bit of a negativity bias based on evolution and how we had to fight for survival. So we have to learn to accept, yes, our full range of emotions, but we also have to learn how to focus on the positive. Barbara Fredrickson earned her Ph.D. in psychology at Stanford, and she now teaches at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She's done extensive work on positive emotion, and she developed the broaden and build theory, which broadens our thinking and attention, it builds our resources and enhances resilience, and it undoes the impact of negative emotion and triggers upward spirals. In a 2005 study done by Liebermuski, King, and Diener, it was determined that positive emotions produce success in life, but they also reflect success in the following areas. You can see that it touches our mental and physical, psychological resources, as well as our physical and social resources. Again, some of the same things that we had on our list, but that we definitely want to promote in our students. E is for engagement. In the early 90s, Michal Csikszentmihalyi, how'd I do, Laura? Good? Okay, good. That's a tough one. He introduced his theory of flow. And flow occurs when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Optimal experience is something that we make happen. So you can see where flow is, again, at the intersection of high skill and high challenge. Flow can occur in math class while you're figuring out a difficult math problem. It can occur on the soccer field or the tennis courts. It can be an individual experience or it can be a social experience. But it's where, again, high skill and high challenge. Does this chart remind you of another chart you may have seen around the Wellington School? Yes? Mimi, I'm seeing you nod your head. What do you?
Our effort in the quadrant.
That one? The quadrant thing, yes. The student engagement chart. So we, and you all know this, so we strive to have our children engaged here at Wellington. And we've adapted the flow chart based on student needs. And again, what does engaged living predict? It predicts life satisfaction, greater life satisfaction, school enjoyment, and better grades. So again, I think things we all want for our kids, yes? Yes. Oh, am I speaking too fast? That was another tip. Am I good? Okay, good. Okay, R is for positive relationships. Positive and secure relationships play a huge role in helping us to improve and achieve in the areas listed here. Some of the same things as we've seen on the other slides. They also allow us the opportunity to explore, to take risks, to try new experiences, because we know that if we have solid, secure relationships, that we have people to fall back on. We know we have people to ask for help, we have people to ask for encouragement and support. But just as important as having these relationships is being able to identify them. And as a quick aside, in my work as a crisis text line counselor, I get this all the time when teens are texting in. I'll say something like, well, who do you have to continue this conversation with? Or who can you reach out to if you need help and you can't get to your phone? And many of them can't even come up with more than two. So a really important activity, I think, is the 5-finger activity, and just have your students, or your children, sorry, my students, your children, be able to identify 5 resources and people that they can go to for help. It's almost as important as being able to ask for help, but knowing who to go to for help. A tiny little bit on the bucket and dipper theory. As you've walked through our lower school halls, you may have seen some of the great artwork and the great things that they've been doing with that. Again, that's the focus, the belief that every interaction that we have matters. If you're filling my bucket or I'm filling your bucket, every interaction that we have with people matters. And that it's a give and take, and the importance of being aware of the give and take leads me to talk a little bit about gratitude, which is actually a huge part of PERMA. I'll give you a moment to read Albert's quote. And true gratitude, according to Carrie Howells, is feeling appreciation and acting on it in some way. So possessing gratitude or appreciation broadens and builds our positive emotions and relationships. And when we act on it, it forges deeper relationships and positively impacts society, so affecting the greater world. It also makes us mindful of the positive in our lives, and I think those are all things that we want to instill in our children. M is for meaning. So positive purpose, we mentioned that as well. As our society moves from being introspective to outrospective, we have to consider the importance of gratitude, but we also must look at our perspective on life. So we can look at the hedonistic perspective or the hedonistic view, and that's focusing on the I life, right? The brief moments where we might be resting or relaxing or doing something that we enjoy. And that's a great feeling in the moment. But if we move our view to the eudaimonic view, the we world, we have to look at how we affect the world, what we can learn from interacting with others in the world, and that leads to greater life satisfaction over the long term. Finally, it's key to identify and prioritize priorities, and I know it sounds funny to say prioritize priorities, but it's true. How do we balance the time we spend with family, with friends, the time we're doing homework, the time we're on the field, the time we're in the theater? It's really important to be mindful of those things. And when you take all of this in conjunction with positive emotions, relationships, and engagement, that leads us to accomplishment. A for accomplishment. And at the core of accomplishment is Dweck's theory on mindsets and her work on neuroplasticity. So I'm not going to talk much about that because Erica has a whole talk planned for you and she does a great job on it. But thinking about a growth mindset, being open to try new things, learning from failure, being responsive to feedback. And just briefly, because I asked Erica if I could mention this, focusing on process praise versus person praise. So your child brings home an A+. What do you say? You don't say, hooray, you got an A+. You say, hooray, you must have worked really hard to prepare and study for this test. Great job, but really you focus on the process. And now, as we recap and go forward, Laura and I wanted to bring you back a little bit of a taste of Australia. So Caroline and Christine are going to pass out some biscuits because biscuits are a big thing. I don't think we stopped eating while we were there. As you enjoy those, I kind of wanted to just recap PERMA and make sure that we are kind of on the same page and we know what's going on. Yes? Yeah? Okay, great. I don't think I have a gluten-free option, sorry. Apologies. You guys have also seen this around, yes? Our mission statement, I think most of us can probably repeat it. Do you see a connection of well-being in and how it might relate to our mission statement? Yes, no? Yes, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see, sorry. I'll go with my fog. My sixth graders did too. So I think it absolutely does, and like I said, the whole, we are all kind of feeling that it ties directly into our mission. We do already do a lot of this already in all three divisions, and that's my only cute koala pick. I did restrain myself. We focus on the whole child. We see this in our advisory and guidance programs, and we aim to offer a lot of opportunities for kids to have different experiences so that they can find and pursue their passion. But I'm closing already. I think if we think about strengthening, fortifying, and protecting our children, I think positive education, this definition of, I'm going to read it to you. Positive education brings together the science of positive psychology with best practice teaching and learning to encourage and support school and individuals within their communities to flourish. I think, like I said, I think we do a lot of this already, but I'm really excited, and I think we're really excited to think about the next steps and what this might look like for Wellington and how it might strengthen, fortify, and protect our children even more. So as we move through this, I look forward to sharing more with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Erin. We all look forward to next steps. So, and you may have a question or two when we get to our question and answer session. You'll be prepared to take a question or two, I think. I'm now delighted to introduce Erica Foster, who is a longtime faculty member in our lower school and the renowned queen of Fosterland. Erica is also a powerful thinker and has shared her work on mindsets with schools across the region and will once again be speaking at the Isaacs Conference on this subject. Erica Foster.
Foster is not used to having a mic that she has to turn on and off. Hi there. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So, part of positive psychology is mindsets. And I'm going to share with you some work that I've been doing to learn about the whole concept of mindsets and just do a brief overview for you. I see a few parents in the room. If you've been in my class the last few years, over the last 3 years, you might have heard some of this coming up. And then I'd like to talk with you about both how we're applying it as teachers at Wellington and also how you might be able to apply this stuff as at home as parents. So that's where we're headed right now. So in 2007, a year after my daughter was born, Dr. Carol Dweck of Stanford University out in California published a book called Mindsets. And she's a psychology professor. That's where she does her research. And she was interested in this question: why do so many students shy away from challenges, crumble in the face of setbacks, stop working when the material comes difficult? I have that same question. There's been a lot, I've been in a lot of situations with my teaching where I used to be a first grade teacher, and learning to read is sort of what you do in first grade, and it is so hard. You cannot believe how hard first grade is, and I miss it. I love fourth grade, but I kind of miss that challenge. And I had kids at this very school even who would literally pretend read to me all year long. They would not engage with the challenge. It was like, why? Why are you doing this? For Carol Dweck, if you read her book, and I hope you do, it's a quick read, it's an easy one. It's one of those you can read the first 4 chapters and then read the parenting chapter and be done if you want. She asked that question because she saw it in herself. She saw that other people would attack challenging material with just energy and zest, and she was hanging back and just feeling dreadful about it. And so she wanted to know why? Why them and not me? So she constructed a fairly basic experiment where they would go out and interact with kids, sort of late elementary school, middle school, some high school kids, and they would give them some problems to solve, sort of logic problems, possibly math problems, I'm not sure. And after the child completed whatever the sheet was, the tester would come in and tell them one of 2 things. Either, wow, you did really well on this. You must be really smart. Or, wow, you did really well on this. You must have worked really hard. And then they would offer them the next challenge. And they say, well, I have a paper here with some other problems on it, and it's sort of like the ones you did before, maybe even a little bit easier. And I have this other paper that has even harder problems on it. And they wanted to see how the kids responded, and then hear from them what their thinking was about those challenges. And they found that the kids behaved in very different ways. So after taking in all that research, she defined the 2 different ways of thinking or the perceptions of challenges having a mindset. And she has described this as a person could have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. So if you have a fixed mindset, you believe that intelligence is unchanging. This is a very American concept. I've lived and worked in Asia. They do not think this way. But here in the United States of America, we believe that you are born smart or you are born talented. I am not supposed to be a teacher. I was an art student. And from the time I was small, I loved to draw, and I was told constantly how talented I was. And you know what? I love art, and I worked really hard at it, and I can paint a mean painting. But I'm not convinced that that necessarily is, am I talented in that? Where did that come from? Because people, for the fixed mindset, believe that you're born smart or you're born talented, their goal is to look smart. In whatever area it is, it can be sports, it can be art, it can be math, it can be reading, they want to look smart. And they'll do a lot to promote that image. Keep this in your mind, because this motivation is really key to that mindset, and it really can explain some behavior in yourself and your kids. Then Carol Dweck noticed that some people had a growth mindset. And for those people, they seem to have a core belief that intelligence can be developed and it can change over time. Because of this, their main motivation is not to look smart. Everything looks fine. Their motivation is simply to learn, and they're willing to look foolish on the way there. They're highly motivated by actually figuring things out. So these are two basic mindsets that she describes in her book. Now, depending on your mindset, you're going to approach challenges and effort differently. Folks who might have a fixed mindset in one area will tend to avoid challenges. Those were the kids who turned down the easy stuff. When she offered the two different tests as a second challenge, they tended to choose the easy ones. And they believed they believed that you should be able to do things naturally. That if you're smart already, things should be easy for you. Maybe you've seen this in your children or yourself. I have it right here. People with a growth mindset, however, tend to approach challenges by embracing them and working hard. They believe that effort is the pathway to mastery, and so they highly value effort, and they'll dive right into it. If you give them a challenging task, they'll say yes. The kids with a growth mindset tended to grab that harder sheet of paper there in the test that they did. Another area that she noticed a difference between the different mindsets, if you have a fixed mindset and you hit an obstacle, things are going along, you're solving problems, you come to one you just can't solve. That one level on Candy Crush Saga, or whatever it is. It's that one math problem, or we get to this step in our study of biology, and it just gets really hard and confusing. A lot of the times, folks with a fixed mindset will give up. And, oh, I'm just not smart enough, I just can't figure it out. They'll step back. They'll go sharpen their pencil 20 times. I see this a lot in the classroom. In opposition to that, folks with a growth mindset, when they get to that setback, they tend to persist. And they don't just persist by beating their head against the wall and doing the same thing over and over again. They tend to persist creatively. They say, okay, can I try that strategy that I learned? I see that she's doing this, can I try what she's doing? The teacher taught us to do this thing, can I use it in this situation? Can I come up with my own creative way to solve that problem? Also, feedback and criticism, that's where the teacher might come and correct you. That happens a lot in the class. It's also when you get that test or that quiz back, maybe the teacher revised that paper with you or edited it for you, and then you've got a whole bunch of red marks on your paper. You probably had that experience earlier in your life at some point. So folks with a fixed mindset tend to see that feedback, even though it may be constructive and helpful. If it's not positive, they often will ignore it. They'll see it as negative, and they'll often just ignore it. Don't want to talk about that. Not going to acknowledge that it's there. Whereas those with a growth mindset, they try to capitalize on their mistakes and learn from them. They might have it's difficult to receive negative feedback, even if it's constructive, but often they will say, they'll be able to move that emotion aside and engage with the learning possibility that's being presented in that feedback. Another area in which you see a difference in the different mindsets is if somebody else is successful. Did somebody else get the part in the play? Or in fourth grade, we write our stories for the fourth grade play, and so did somebody else get their story chosen? Did somebody else get to be the captain of the team? Or did somebody else get this opportunity that I wanted to have? Folks with a fixed mindset tend to engage in poverty thinking. They'll feel threatened by the fact that that kid got it and I didn't. And they'll see it as, well, there's only one opportunity, or there's only one chance to succeed here, and that person got it, so my life is over, woe is me. Whereas, we see it. Growth mindset, folks with a growth mindset, they will definitely be disappointed if they don't get what they were hoping for, but they'll also look for lessons and inspiration in those people who did get that place. They might say, okay, so he's the captain of the team, what did he do to get that? Or, her story was chosen for the play, what is it about her story that I can use in my writing to make it even better? So the social interaction there really changes. And so as a conclusion, folks with a fixed mindset in any area of their life, they tend to plateau early. These kids can have a lot of potential and a lot of ability, and it's not that they don't learn, but often they sort of reach a place and then they just kind of stop. And they'll never really reach their full potential because they tend to keep away from challenges. They also tend, I've noticed this with my students sometimes, they tend to get very judgmental, both of themselves and others. They'll say, well, there's only that one chance to succeed and I have failed, so I'm a failure and I'm a bad person, and now we're sounding a lot like Miss Foster in her head sometimes. Also, then they'll pass that judgment on to others, and that can also stress social relationships. Whereas those who have a growth mindset tend to reach ever higher levels of achievement. They may not reach the highest level of achievement. I mean, in Carol Dweck's book, she likes to tell the story again of Michael Jordan, who went out for the middle school basketball team and was cut right away. Growth mindset right there, worked very hard, learned a lot of strategies and techniques, really put himself into it. He did reach the highest level of achievement. Not everyone's going to get to Michael Jordan status in whatever area you're looking for, but they're going to keep going. And as long as they keep putting that effort and that creativity into it, they're going to keep going. So we're going to go higher and higher. And those folks tend to be more gracious with themselves and others because of how they see mistakes and feedback. And so their social relationships will be a little different, possibly easier. And they often become really strong problem solvers because when they hit those obstacles, when they meet those challenges, they're looking for how can I engage with this? How can I get past it? What can I figure out for myself? Now, I am a 4th grade teacher, and I am very concerned about you because you have been sitting for longer than I am happy. So I am going to trust you to do what my 4th graders do. I'm going to give you 1 minute to stand up, and I do want you to stand. It raises your heart rate. It gets fresh blood up to your brain. Stretch yourself out. Just a minute. Introverts, we're going to help out our extroverts. I want you to ask somebody near you, what's resonating? What's sinking in? And then extroverts, help our introverts do the ask back. After you've said some things, give them a minute to speak. They're often deep thinkers. You don't want to miss out on their thoughts. Stand up, everybody, and ask somebody a good question. Take advantage of the springs. Oh, you're wrapping up your conversations. You're bringing what you're saying to an end. You hear the teacher's loud teaching voice. No, you don't hear the teacher's voice? You hear the teacher's loud teaching voice. And so you bring your conversation to an end, and you're sitting back down. Oh, you're re-energized because you stood up and had a good conversation. Yeah. What's exciting to me about this information is that not only does it line up with what I see in my classroom already, with my personality type, I tend to intuitively understand things and not be able to have the language for them. So this has really given me language for what I see in the classroom. I see fixed mindsets and I see growth mindsets. And I want to get my kids to the growth mindset. This also excites me though because it turns out that this model of thinking about the growth mindset completely lines up with current brain research in how we learn. There is a true one and a false one in this case. The growth mindset shows us how the human brain works. I grew up learning that I'd better learn languages when I was little because only little kids can learn languages well. And you might have heard that too. It's false. It's completely a lie. I grew up hearing that, there were those math kids and then there were those art kids. You know what? It turns out that was a lie. That was a lie. But our culture believes it, and we believe it. We pass it down to our kids without even trying. These are my kids. I put them up here because they make me happy. I also put them up here because they're excellent examples of where do our mindsets come from, because they have different ones. So first of all, there's temperament. You're just going to have, I'm married to Eeyore. I'm usually Pooh Bear in our relationship, but that sweet little girl up there, my Emma, she struggles with a fixed mindset in some areas. Now, some areas not, so let me interject that. It turns out you can have a fixed mindset in one area and a growth mindset in another. You can have fixed mindsets in many areas and growth mindset in a few, or vice versa. I have a very growth mindset about a whole lot of things, and a fairly fixed mindset that I'm currently battling about weight loss, physical strength, and physical education. And I have had that for a very, very long time. I am the math queen of the Wellington Lower School, and I was an art student in college, and I have been fighting a fixed mindset in my own life about mathematics for a very, very long time, much to both the chagrin and amusement of my engineer father, who I resemble greatly. So there are some temperament issues. I mean, if you love the arts and you don't love math, you're going to spend more time and effort there. And then you might look at your math performance and say, oh, well, you know what? I've had students who literally go home on the weekends and in the evenings and they and their dad play math games all night. And they do logic puzzles and they have these big conversations. Whereas I, as a child, went home, closed the door to my room and started drawing and telling myself stories. I'm a teacher, not an engineer. That one, he's going to be an engineer. There's also the beliefs of our surrounding culture, and I've mentioned this before. I taught and worked in Japan for a while, and I had a lot of Korean parents, had a lot of Japanese parents, Chinese parents, and their expectation was that their kids were just going to work really hard. They don't have a lot of special education programs in Japan because they believe that if you're not doing well in an area, you're just going to have to work hard and put more time in at night, and then they actually enforce that. So we have a cultural belief that we are fighting, and my little girl, she is struggling with that. If you have a daughter, a lot of our culture tells girls that they're supposed to be a certain way, look a certain way, and being smart or smarter than the boys was not really acceptable over at Upper Wellington High School back in 1986. Well, let me tell you something. She happens to have been identified recently as being gifted, and our gifted learners are at a special risk for getting into a fixed mindset, and it's because we tell them they're smart. It's what we do in our culture. I can't stop my mom. She walked in the room the day Emma was born and said, "Look at her, she's a genius." And Mom was right, because Mom is always right. But that is the last thing that my little genius ever needs to hear again. Okay, now this book came out in 2007, and I was on it pretty quick, and I've been working on changing my language for a long time, so I just got to let you know, it's not the end-all, be-all, but it's an effective tool that we can use, and this is the good news, is that we as adults can have an impact on our children by how we praise them and how we encourage them. And we can teach them about mindsets, which is what we're trying to do here at Wellington, so that they can actually use those tools to make good choices about their mindsets. And so that to me is encouraging because we can actually do something here. Let's see. I think I got all of that. So what actions are we taking? I'm going to offer these to you that we're doing in the classroom and also things that you can do at home. So this is, if you've been by my classroom, and many of you have, and you've seen these all over the lower school, I took this flow chart that sort of sums up everything that Carol Dweck has in her book. It's directly from her book. I did not create the flow chart. I just made it big and very colorful. You have a copy on the back of the handout that I gave to you, and you can stick this on your refrigerator just like I've stuck it up on my wall. And so what we've been doing is we've been saying, okay, if our language can affect a kid's mindset, by the way, I don't know if I clarified this, what they were finding when they did their experiment was when they told the kids, wow, you did well at that, you're really smart, they could knock them into a fixed mindset instantly. That it was very difficult for those kids to overcome what they'd been told. And just hearing that they were smart once could affect what they chose in terms of challenge or not. Whereas if they told that child, wow, you did really well, you must have worked so hard, bam, I just knocked you into a growth mindset. Probably not for the rest of your life, but for the next challenge, those kids were much more likely to take the challenging problems. And they would say, because I want to learn. I mean, I don't know, this stuff, that's all that for me. Like if you've got a kid who's, yeah, I want to learn that, then all of a sudden that whole positive psychology thing is working for me. So we've been using visual prompts in the classroom to help us as teachers change to a growth mindset praise model. And so what I did in my classroom, we also do some little mini lessons. I do them during morning work. And just to introduce this vocabulary like I've introduced it to you today. And the first year I did, I kind of built the little chart as I went. Now it just lives there on the wall. And what we found is that when this was on the wall, I would be working with children and I would want to encourage them and I would say, wow, and I would look at my chart on the wall, you're working really hard on that. Because I needed this to change my vocabulary because I'm going against our culture here in the United States. And so this gave me a lot of reminders as a teacher, and it's doing that for other teachers in our school. And that was the main purpose of me doing it, is how can I become a growth mindset teacher? But what we also found is that our children, our students, began to refer to it also. And so they would look up there and they would say, oh, this is hard, but we should really persist because that will get us to where we're wanting to go. They started using this language in the classroom. And so, again, I'm really working on this with my 4th grader right now at home. She's struggling in the area of writing, very fixed mindset about it. But I'm continuing to give her this praise to fight against this sort of voice in her head that she's got going on. Which leads us to the next area where my mom is always right. My mother worked for a long time with me, and she still does sometimes, on using what she calls positive self-talk. And so if you flip your flowchart over on the back at the bottom of the page, this is straight off of the official Mindsets website. They actually encourage you to do the same thing as parents, or even just for yourself. They say, you know, if you can identify that that's a fixed mindset voice, and talk back to it with the growth mindset language, and make a plan of how you're going to implement one of the growth mindset strategies. This is hard. I feel scared and nervous with this challenge, but I'm going to choose to work hard. I've reached an obstacle or a setback, but I'm going to choose to make a creative choice. By the way, if you're already familiar with mindsets, and a lot of different groups are beginning to sort of adopt the language and sometimes misuse it, Carol Dweck herself, just in the last week, came out with a new article saying we might be over-focusing on the effort piece and not on the creativity piece that's inherent to it. So when it comes to overcoming obstacles and dealing with criticism, that has to do with creativity and flexibility in thinking. Can we praise that? Did you try a strategy? Did you figure something out for yourself? That sort of owning their own learning and overcoming it creatively is a big part of that praise. So we're looking at that as well. And those are things that you can do at home as parents. I put a couple websites on here for you to look at. I will let you know, just as an aside, I put the Joe Bowler website and the book on there. One of another things that we are doing in our classrooms, and this is building, like Erin said, on what we already do. But I went to a conference by Dr. Joe Bowler, who also works at Stanford down the hall from Carol Dweck, and she's working specifically in mathematics. And she suggested that our words and our language are not enough, but that we need to give children situations where they are going to struggle in their learning, where they're going to make mistakes and have to cope with failure, but also where their problems are growth mindset problems, so that they're low floor, everybody can participate in them, but they're really high ceiling. You can go and go and go. They're open-ended, and there's not just one pathway to get there, and there's not even necessarily one right destination. And I'll let you know, the lower school's working super hard on our math teaching right now, trying to figure out how do we take that model and teach math that way. We already do a lot of it in the whole school with language arts and with reading. I know there's a lot going on in science that you're going to hear about in just a few minutes. So we're also looking at the kind of tasks we give the kids. What you can do on the parent end is you can ask your children, how did that thing go for you? Oh yeah, it was really easy. I am so sorry. Should I write your teacher? Because if you're not being challenged, you won't learn. Dr. Buller, she has some online courses that you can take. The one for students is free, and all the 4th graders did it this year to start off our math year, and I am geeked. Oh my goodness. Please, my dream is that all of you go home and take this 6-lesson completely free course and experience the wonder of learning from Stanford in the comfort of your own home. But one of the things she talks about is recent research. They've found in brain research that when you make a mistake, your brain grows in that moment. Then when you identify the mistake, it grows again, and when you figure out how to overcome it, your brain is growing even more. Brain growth is another way of saying learning. And even when you make that mistake, before you even realize it, your brain has grown. That's so exciting. We can get our kids to look at mistakes differently. I mean, it just changes everything. So what do kids say about this? Well, Nora was in my class several years ago when I first was trying to begin speaking about this, and I was going to talk just to the teachers here in our lower school. And I said, what do you think about me doing this? What do you think the other teachers should know? And Nora says, well, it's important to know when you're doing a fixed mindset, because then you can change what you're doing. Because if you don't, you won't. And she looked at the flow chart on the wall that's sort of reminding all of us where we're trying to head, and she said, reach your full potential. She was internalizing this. And the idea that you have a choice. I have a choice about my physical education. Now, luckily I moved close enough, but I'm riding my bike to school. I'm getting stronger. I'm going to figure this out. It's really hard when you've got a 2-year-old at home. By the way, I didn't talk about the 2-year-old, but if you had one, you know someone who had a growth mindset once. That's what a growth mindset is. Yeah. So, We're looking for clear language to direct students to stronger approaches. The kids change how they respond to each other and themselves. They become more aware when they're operating in a growth mindset. And honestly, we talk about engagement here. To me, engagement is if you're in a growth mindset about something and you're willing to take that perspective on your learning, you are engaged. You're not pretend reading to me in first grade. You're going for it, and you're making the mistakes, and you're sounding out that horrible long word with 10 syllables in it that we just did down in 4th grade yesterday. There was a field trip today, sorry, no reading. So that's really what we're looking for. Now, the lower school teachers especially have been working with me on that flow chart and changing our language. In the middle school, the teachers have been actually engaged with a program that Carol Dweck designed online for middle schoolers called Brainology, and we've actually had the kids learning about brain research and mindsets in that way. We had a speaker come out a few years back talk about resiliency, Dr. Ginsberg, I think his name was. I don't know if you saw him. The mindset stuff all works into that. So we're really approaching this in a lot of different ways. Growth mindset thinking sets up students to persist in inquiry, critical thinking, and problem-based learning that's grounded in strong student ownership. And that is what Dr. Sullivan is going to share with you next. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Don't you all feel your mindsets falling into the growth mindset? Thank you so much. Next, our final speaker for tonight is Dr. Brandon Sullivan, who is in his first year at Wellington. It's the first time at this event we've ever had a first-year employee speak. Okay, now it's only the second time we've had the event, but still impressive. Brandon has already made a deep impact on the upper school, and his work as a researcher forms the foundation of his work in inspiring students to be researchers and to pursue questions wherever they may lead. So, Dr. Brandon Sullivan.
Thank you. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to follow Erica, because I think that research can be one of those avenues where we take a student who has that growth mindset and we use that as a channel to challenge them. And I also think it's an opportunity to develop that growth mindset in students that may have that fixed mindset to begin with. So as someone new to the Wellington faculty, I wanted to take a moment to kind of introduce myself to the community. So I come here from Ohio State, where I spent the last 10 years teaching and researching. I had a dual appointment in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry and the Department of Surgical Oncology. One of the projects that I'm really proud of is I engineered an antibody fragment, so it's a protein molecule that specifically binds cancer cells but not healthy cells. And so the current state of the art for cancer imaging is so poor that most academic institutes across the country no longer employ it. And so what we have now is an antibody molecule that interacts specifically with cancer cells. So we can produce images where we highlight the tumors and give surgeons much more information going into the operating room. And so this was incredibly productive work, multiple publications, several patents, and we spun out 2 companies based on this work. And so kind of the next step to that research is if you're targeting this antibody to a cancer cell, instead of using that as a potential to image, what if you used it as a therapy? Could you take a nanoparticle that had some chemotherapy agent and target it directly to the cancer cells? And since it's not interacting with healthy cells anymore, then you won't have those side effects with chemotherapies. And so in order to do this, you have to conjugate the antibody to the nanoparticle using molecular chemistry through these polyethylene glycols. It's a very complicated process. And so I'm sorry if I lost you with some of the technical jargon, but I get very animated when I talk about these exciting projects, but not for the reason you might think. This is my work on the left panel. This work was done last year by a Wellington senior. So this was a student who was involved in our independent science research project. She went to campus, she conducted this research, they did all of the proof of concept experiments, and it's looking very promising. So this excites me because it tells me that our students have a great potential to achieve amazing things if we just give them the right tools and the right resources. And I think that's what we're doing at Wellington. And so the reason we're able to do that is because we approach science education differently at our institute as opposed to other academic places across the country. So back in 1892, there was a committee of 10 individuals, and they sat down and they planned out our education from kindergarten, all the way through high school. And they decided that they would teach a year-long sequence of biology, followed by chemistry, followed by physics. This is still how almost everyone approaches science education. And then to take it one insulting step further, we end up seeing blanket statements like this littered through the textbooks. In such year, a person did such and such experiment, and now because of that experiment, you're supposed to understand science. We basically reduce chemistry, biology, physics to a history course. And so to me, that's very similar to trying to teach the next generation painter through a series of art history lessons. It's not just enough to know the history, what happened before you. You need that hands-on application, and that's what research gets. And so if you kind of force someone to learn through history without the practice, without the ability to make mistakes and learn from it, then you get Spanish frescoes that were restored very poorly, like poor Cecilia happened in 2012. And so this is something that we embrace at the Wellington School. In the lower and the middle school, there are many project-based, inquiry-based, and research-based projects to start students on this avenue early. And so for some of you, you may have seen the weather stem. We have a weather beacon that's installed on our roof now. It records data including temperature, pressure, cloud cover. And the students can look at this data either by logging onto the website or at live tweets if you're interested. And you can see here that students can look at this and they can say, look, there's a daily high and a daily low, and this pattern repeats itself throughout a week. And then a student might look at this and say, why is there a depression there? And so that kind of sparks a hypothesis where they can now go test that. Maybe there was cloud cover. Maybe there was a cold front that came through. Maybe there was a storm. And so they can look at the remaining data and see if they can find some sort of correlation or causation. We're also involved with FLOW, which stands for Friends of the Lower Olentangy River Watershed. And so what we're doing with FLOW is we're examining biological specimens, chemical specimens, and all the tributaries and waters that feed into the Olentangy to look to see how healthy those streams are, what effects the environment is having on those particular organisms and their environment there as well. And then one of the projects that I really like at Wellington is something that the first grade through fourth grade students take on, and that's called iTime. They will go to the teacher for a trimester and they will say, I'm really interested in this question. I want to find out more about this problem. I want to develop this invention to help me walk the dog easier. And so the students then get a trimester with faculty facilitating those type of experiments and development to see if they can engineer a solution, to see if they can find the answer to the question that they posed. So we're starting research very early. And so in the upper school, we're so invested in this mindset that research is really how we can push learning that a couple years ago, we adopted our science curriculum. So getting away from the 100-plus-year-old strategy, what we've done is we've taken elements of chemistry, we've taken elements of physics, and we've taken elements of biology, and we've merged them into one class that is taught both sophomore and junior year. And we call this the foundation courses. And what you can see now is students are taking those 3 years worth of classes condensed down to a 2-year curriculum. And we're able to do this because we have talented students, we have a talented STEM faculty here at Wellington, but the benefits are worth that extra challenge that we put on the students and the faculty to accomplish those same goals. I talked to Liz and Jasmine earlier this week and I said, what has been the biggest impact of the foundation courses to you? And both of them gave me almost verbatim answers. They said, because I took chem, biology, and physics so young, my freshman and sophomore year, my junior and senior year, I had the opportunity to take advanced level courses like marine biology, molecular genetics, infectious disease. And so those course titles, those are things you would see in a college catalog, not a high school campus. And our students are getting exposed to that starting their junior year, and in some cases even their sophomore year. But what we really like about this approach is now that the students are getting great foundations to start advanced courses as a junior, it opens up the door for that research opportunity. And so really the pinnacle for that is what we call the Independent Science Research Program, or we shorten that often to ISR. And so this is a year-long course that students participate in. And so I just want to take a moment or two to kind of walk you through that curriculum so you have a better idea and understanding of what we try and accomplish with it. So in the first trimester, the students enroll in the course, they come, they fill out assignments, and we use that as an opportunity to kind of gauge their interests. So a student may come in and say, I really like chemistry. But do you like analytical chemistry, biological chemistry, materials chemistry, organic chemistry, physical chemistry? There's a wide breadth within that one field. And so we try and figure out what really sparks the student's creativity, What are they going to be challenged to go pursue? What's going to help them with their later academic career and their professional career? And so that's part of the first trimester. And then we use that information to try and find them a lab at Ohio State, at a research and development firm that they can drive to set up kind of a relationship with a research mentor. And so in the second trimester and the third trimester, they'll go to that lab once, twice, maybe more a week. We have some students who go on weekends. And they'll conduct authentic research in a lab with graduate students, postdocs, professors. And they really gain something that we don't have the ability to do when we think about that year-long sequence of biology, then chemistry, then physics. And so on a side of that, not only are they getting this rich research experience within these labs, but we're also building a curriculum to complement that. So in that first trimester, we're working with the students, not only to develop those interests, but teaching them how to write a resume, how to work a cover letter, how to go through an interview process. Because getting into those labs is not an easy process. It's a huge sacrifice for those labs at Ohio State to undertake. So we need to prepare the student and make them look marketable, make them look attractive to those labs that we're sending them to. And so that's part of the process. And then when they get to the lab, we don't want them getting to the lab and saying, I use this $100,000 piece of equipment, I put my sample in here, I collect the data out here, and someone tells me what it means. They can come back and say, I use a PCR machine at OSU. What is that? And we can build a curriculum that says what that instrument does, what are the advantages, disadvantages, what are some alternatives, how do you interpret the data? And so that's all part of the strategy, so that they're not just getting the shadowing experience, they're learning about science through instrumentation and through the scientific method. And what is additionally nice about this program that differentiates us from other programs is our students can enroll in this as early as sophomore year. So if a sophomore or junior participates in a lab and it's a good fit and they really liked the experience, they can go back the next year, and they're not starting from scratch now. They're starting with a full year worth of research experience. And so that is very powerful. One thing that I like to point out is that the difference between a second-year grad student and a six-year grad student is dramatic. A second-year grad student, in my experience, knows nothing. A six-year graduate student knows everything. They can go into the career field, they can be a professor, they can work in industry. And how many classes do you think they take between that second and sixth year? 0. It's all research-driven learning experience, gaining confidence, gaining skills, learning about new concepts. And so the fact that our students can have multiple cycles of going through that research is really powerful for this program. And then I want to give an additional plug that, as Erica mentioned, some students love the sciences. Some students love the humanities. And so one thing that we're working here at Wellington, Erin is putting together an analogous program called the Independent Humanities Research Program, where students can engage in philosophy, literature, anthropology research through the same sort of program, pairing up students with experts off campus. And so what you're seeing here is just a brief snapshot of some places that we have sent students this year and in years past. So you can see our campus is landlocked between Reed, Fishinger, and the golf course. But academically, we're not landlocked at all. We can expand in pretty much every direction we want. We've taken visits to the zoo where we gain research experience there. The pathology lab at OSU is going to be working with a student this year. We have a student at Otterbein. We're going to be looking at biological and chemical monitoring at the Ohio State golf course. How are the chemicals and fertilizers impacting those environments? And that's similar to what we're doing at Flow. We also had a student last year and several this year at Nationwide Children's Hospital. One of the students I want to point out is Natalie Twitchell. So she conducted a research project where she looked at a genetic disease, and she was looking to see how that genetic disease impacted neuron synapses. She would actually look at neurons under a microscope and count the number of synapses they formed. And synapses is what allow us to conduct thought, have reflexes. It's basically the control of our body, both physically and mentally. So a very sophisticated project for one of our students. And Alex is an interesting one to point out because instead of going to an academic lab for research, he went to Entratech, where he worked on a rheological experiment, where he studied the properties of fluids. And that had a lot of implications for the next generation of computer chips, especially in small devices like phones and tablets. And so also, those projects that I've talked about just recently are part of the ISR project. but we also have abilities for students to get involved in research if they're not enrolled in one of those projects. So for example, with Flow, we can take a dozen students out on a field trip to examine one of the streams. In fact, we just adopted Sly and Ackerman Run, where we can conduct biological and chemical testing. So students can get involved at research at that area. For us, as early as freshmen, and we have collaborations in the middle school as well. And also, PEARL stands for the Patuxent Environmental and Aquatic Research Lab. It's partnered up with Morgan State in the Chesapeake Bay. And we've sent students in the past there to engage in a research project. Dr. Turwin has taken some of his marine bio students to collect samples in the bay, bring them back here for study, and a lot of those are alive and well and used for observation in our lab downstairs. And so speaking of the lab downstairs, it's our Wellington Research Institute. It's something that I'm very proud of to be part of the development process. So when the chemistry lab moved upstairs into this new facility, we were left with a lab. And we decided to renovate that and turn it into a space for authentic research projects in ISR. So the goal here is not just to send students to labs at Ohio State, but to bring them some of those projects back to campus. So if a student is working on something that involves, let's say, UV-Vis spectroscopy, we can put a UV-Vis spec in our lab, and they can conduct some of that research now here on campus, before and after school, during breaks, during their free periods, and really make that work more accessible and flexible for the students. Working with Lori Beth and Stephanie, we got a Benedict Foundation grant that we found out our award this last summer. So that was $40,000 that can go towards renovations and instrumentations from the lab. And we also received funding from the Humphreys family. And so I got this quote from Scott Humphrey earlier today. I'm just going to take a moment to read it. Creating an environment of fearless learning requires a vision of what is possible, a willingness to take risks to achieve that vision, and someone to step forward and lead. Wellington was founded by such leaders. The Wellington Research Institute is a natural extension of the work that has been done here since our founding. We invested in the Institute so our community can continue to learn and explore in meaningful ways with passion and purpose. So I think a lot of the words that are described in that quote were written on this board, and Erin and Erica have already alluded to within their talks. And so it's something that we're very proud of to have this Wellington Research Institute that we'll continually invest in over the next few years. And so what is also nice about this idea of sending students off campus, if you notice the first time I showed this slide, all of the arrows pointed out towards these institutes because that's where we were sending the students. One thing that is very powerful about this project is when the students come back, they're coming back with a new set of knowledge that they can share with our students and faculty. For example, those students can bring students into the Wellington Research Institute and say, hey, check out this cool experiment that I did at OSU. I'm going to replicate it here to see if it holds up. And now they're engaging some students that may not have been engaged before. The ISR program is going to work to pair the students with lower and middle schoolers in a mentor-mentee relationship so we can get those younger students into the lab, actively engaged in research at a younger age. And this doesn't just work for our students and our faculty as well. Peter Tian, for example, was remotely advised by a professor at MIT. Not only did he bring back his work on multidimensional matrices here, but he presented a seminar at Ohio State where he taught grad students, postdocs, and professors. How awesome is that? So you may also know Peter Tian for winning the Siemens Award last year. It was a $100,000 award, and he's the only Ohio student to win that. So that was all because of his research project. Just to give you a snapshot of some of the work that our other students are doing, Nilu is working at Otterbein. She's looking at how specific proteins mediate interactions between lipid droplets, and there's implications there between obesity and diabetes. Matthew's working at Ohio State on T cells. T cells are normal cells in our body that we use in our immune system. But in some autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis, they start to attack the brain and the spinal cord. And so he's trying to learn more about that process, about why that system goes faulty. Maju, she's great. She started her project last year, and she worked about 30 hours a week throughout the entire summer down at Ohio State. So she's one of those students that started a project, continued it into the summer, and she's going to be back in that lab this year continuing that project. So when I talked about the power of being able to repeat those cycles, she is a prime example of that. In fact, she's currently working on an IND, which is a document called an investigational new drug. It's an application that you send to the FDA, and it's the first step towards getting a clinical trial. I'm currently working on one of those, so I may have to ask her for advice, since they successfully submitted theirs earlier this summer. And so these are all practical applications of research, and I think if we just step back and think about why research is important, it's because there's a vast richness associated with research. So on the one hand, there's independence. It's not something that the students are doing and their 19 other classmates are doing side by side. It's something that they have to take ownership of and they have to be devoted to. There's simple things like they have to learn to manage their time, logistics. How do I balance doing my academic work here, going to campus? How do I travel back and forth and not miss classes? So putting that responsibility into the hands of the students is something that I take a lot of pride in so that they have that skill set when they go to college. I think research is also a great avenue to engage students who might be struggling with some of the sciences. And I think that might be counterintuitive. This seems advanced, right? But actually putting your hands on the experiments and seeing the reactions take place in front of you really drives home those concepts. It helps forge connections between different concepts. It helps develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. All the things that we want to teach within the classroom can also be taught within the research lab. And I think for those students who already have the growth mindset, it really does push them beyond the textbook. If you're doing research, that means you don't know the answer. You can't look it up anywhere. Google will not be your friend for this. And there really is a value associated with the hard work that goes involved because research is never easy. And I love that up here somewhere we have confronting failure that one of the parents said. And it is so true. If you want to talk about growth mindset, I love the quote from Thomas Edison. I didn't fail at making a light bulb 1,000 times. I learned 1,000 different ways not to make a light bulb. I think that is a complete embodiment of what the growth mindset is. And so this all comes together for our talented students. And then I think there's also practical applications. We want all of our students to do well. We want them to succeed. We want them to get into colleges. We want them to get scholarships. Research is a potential avenue for that. It's going to strengthen them in the classroom. It's going to show their independence. And it's going to be a unique piece to the application process that might separate them from other students. And then the last thing I want to talk about is enjoyment. And I think enjoyment is perhaps the greatest reason that our students should take on research, because they might enjoy it. They might find a lifelong passion that starts here at Wellington. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Now we're going to pull some chairs out and have our speakers come up. And so if you have a question or two that you'd like to ask, I'm reflecting on the fact that I now understand why we're giving flashlights today. That was because we have speakers who are shedding such light on the educational process, right? So now I've figured it out. So we're going to, and thanks to all three of you for such provocative thinking. Have a seat. And do people have questions? Okay. Shall I give you the mic? Shall we do that, or? All right, let's give it a try. Okay.
Where they take a picture and is that on? And they take a picture and they write a brief thing underneath about it. They're really into mindfulness, and so often a class will start with 3 minutes of perhaps standing meditation or a quick meditation. And actually, the 11th graders asked for meditation rooms before taking their exams, just being purposeful and mindful. They do a lot. I didn't even mention character strengths and the work they do around character strengths, the 24 character strengths. That is every activity that they do it's a reflection on, what activity strengths they're touching on or what they might want to improve upon. But it starts in 5th grade. It's throughout the curriculum. In 10th grade, there are our classes that are taught specifically on Pause Ed, but otherwise it's straight through the curriculum. And I won't hog the mic. Is that good? About 9 years. They do. They started a couple years ago with the I'm looking at Laura because we were both there. Looking a couple years ago, and they did see some direct correlations in terms of achievement with this, and it just depended on the class, really. Do you want to add to that? No. As to grow well-being versus how that relates to academic success. But, right. No, I know, and I mentioned that. Thank you, Laura, for doing that. And they also, in terms of, they also spit into a test tube, but they also get a little reminder on their phone, how are you feeling right now? And so they're tracking that, so pretty awesome stuff.
I might have to defer that question to someone who actually knows where the students ended up. So Peter went to Harvard. That's a pretty good place. Thank you, Dr. Sherwin.
So it's following up somewhat on that. I was sort of research as a great way of figuring out what you're interested in and what you like. And I see I have seventh grade who is sometimes interested, sometimes not interested in learning more. Is it possible to, I mean, can you start research too early, you know? Is it possible for fifth graders to enjoy research and learning more by sort of as an independent study, or I don't know, maybe in your opinion?
I don't think you can start too young at all. I mean, if you look at some of the passions that students have outside the classroom, like video games, how much research do they put into video games? They know all of the secrets of how do I get through this level. They know the resources, where to go to find out information for that. So we might not value that as part of, a productivity point of view, but they are learning research skills and how to find answers to tough questions that way. So in that regard, I don't think that you can start research too early ever.
I mean, I can think of my own children trying to stack blocks, and it only takes them a few days to figure out you have to start with a stable base. I mean, that is a research experiment because it's trial and error, confronting failure, figuring out avenues that work. So I think there's no early threshold that we should try and impose.
Yeah, it's a very interesting double-edged sword because I think Wellington's such a great job of educating the kids that they almost become completely dependent on the direction they get from Wellington. And even with robotic here at Wellington, I had an easier time instructing them. But I think with the second Wellington, I have a really hard time. I think he has a hard time taking instruction from me. Because he enjoyed what he learned and how he learned at school so much more. That when we have conversations about it, he really not interested. It's funny because we talked about research. When I tried to come up with ideas for him to pursue things that he liked, and his attitude is becoming more and more like, well, you're not my teacher. I'm going to go talk to the teacher about that and see what they have to say. And so I'm wondering, your presentation made me think of that. Because, I'm wondering if there's sort of an independent approach to parents possibly. Kids can come up with things that they're interested in, maybe it can be something that they have to practice. You know what, it's kind of I haven't had much time to think about it. It only since you mentioned it that I thought about it. But I don't want to call it research because it's not something that's research. But, it's an interesting problem.
Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective.
So how do you build up confidence for a student who's maybe in a fixed mindset and you want to tell them you're bright, you can do this? How do you change your language? So the words in the flowchart that I gave you hopefully will help. And I put them up on the wall in my room to change my language. So when you're dealing with a child who has a fixed mindset, I think one of the things you can really do to help them is acknowledge that. An example from my class is in 4th grade we all have a chance to work with robotics for a certain time of the year, and we put the kids in teams and they have to work with very frustrating lessons from the Carnegie Mellon Institute that are specifically designed to make the children fail. They will fail. Like literally, if they do everything they're told, it will not work. And this is to get them into that habit of learning from their mistakes. So I had 2 little girls a few years back, very fixed mindset about themselves as computer programmers. They were perhaps not that interested in robotics to begin with, and they tended to show some fixed mindset thinking in other areas as well. And when they got in there and they started failing, they turned on each other like that, and they weren't going anywhere. So I took them aside and I said to them, I'm worried because it looks to me like you feel like when you fail, you don't look smart. And the relief on their faces, yes, my sponsor said exactly. And you're worried that you won't look smart and then people will think that you're dumb. Now that's the motivation of someone with a fixed mindset. They want to look smart. And we can acknowledge that for them. Oh, the relief when I said that. And I said, okay, here's what I want you to understand. For me as your adult, as your parent, as your teacher, you look smart to me. When you do this, when you embrace that challenge, and when you're brave and you persist through your mistakes and you keep going even though you fail, and you look for what you can learn in this situation, you look smart to me there. That's the behavior of an intelligent person. If you want to bring that language in, you can, because they hear it all the time and they want to look smart. So I said, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to ask you to really be careful to try these strategies that we've been working on. You can suggest that to your kids within your conversations with them. And teaching them about the mindset so they know they have a choice is really powerful. So every time those girls were working, I would come over and I would check in on them fairly frequently, and I would say, okay, is it hard? Yes. What are you doing? Okay, they're working hard. They're trying this thing. They're encouraging each other. They're using each other's ideas. And I said, you look really smart here. You look very successful. So I tricked them into taking the growth mindset action. And by the end of the course, they were regularly taking that action. They had changed their mindset towards each other as learners, towards themselves as learners, and towards robotics. They didn't just catch up to everybody because they were behind. They surpassed a lot of the kids. It was crazy. I mean, I was like, whoa. And when the parents came to see it, they had their robots doing things that were above and beyond where we were hoping to get everybody. So by helping kids acknowledge where they are, be aware that kids with a fixed mindset, because they want to look smart, once you teach them mindsets, they'll give you the growth mindset language. I mean, they'll figure you out. But it's getting them to take that action. And then also to acknowledge it's emotionally stressful to feel like I'm not smart enough. I mean, that's really hard. Kids really struggle with that from a very young age. So that's my suggestion. That's what we've been practicing at school. And like I say with my daughter, it will not always work. She's taken the Joe Bowler class on how to learn math. There's so much mindset stuff in there. You wouldn't believe it. She's read an article about this in her 3rd grade class and then come home and had me teach it again to her and then come to school and seen it on the wall. And I mean, this mother talks about it more than anyone. And she still falls back in there. And we're working on helping her really struggle through her obstacles right now. But I am convinced that once she's completed that struggle and sees herself as strong, she'll just keep going. We're just in that tough place right now. So you just hang in there with them. That's what I've said.
There's always the pressure moment here to be the last. Which she are you?
She has the pretty black.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Okay. Yeah.
Sure. So right now in our first trimester, we're still in the pairing stage where students are developing interest in getting to labs. In fact, I think by the end of the week, we'll have 8 of the 9 students placed with their research mentor. So that's actually ahead of schedule for this year. And now that those students are going to start engaging in that research and bringing components of it back, I think that's where we get the lower and the middle school involved. So I'm going to work with Kristen Geary in the middle school, and I have to line up contact in the lower school as well. Mrs. Harris, yeah, our science teacher there. So that we can have that mentor-mentee relationship maybe on Fridays, or we can devote some time before or after school where we get the students into the lab and they say, here's an experiment that I did, watch this change colors, or we can figure out a way to make that science accessible for the younger students as well. So it's something that I'm excited to develop, and I think maybe by January we'll start to see some of that come to fruition.
We have more in our enrichment series, and it's all in this pamphlet. Do I have it right side up this time? Thank you all for coming, and thank you to our tremendous speakers. We hope it's been a positive and productive evening for you, and have a nice evening.